Welcome back to another episode of Hand Tool Rescue. Today I have a small, about 1 horsepower, vertical steam engine. And my wrenches suck. And they're edible now, which is really weird. But, whatever Evaporust does, it does. So this steam engine was sent to me by Andrew at Blacksmith Tools. I saw it in its horrendous condition and knew I immediately had to have it because it must be rescued. So it is now in my possession, and I'm going to try the best I can to basically remake this entire steam engine, since so many parts are not only missing, but completely damaged and need to be repaired or replaced. So, right off the bat, we notice we have some Babbitt bearings here. Those are 100% going to be recast by me, just so we can start from a place that at least I know is proper. I have no idea the amount of wear at this point that each Babbitt bearing has incurred over its life, so a new recast of those is essentially requirement at this point. Now, this is an Orr and Sembauer steam engine. That's why there's an O and S trademark cast into the base. There isn't much on this, honestly. There's maybe one piece of literature that I could find, and it also still kind of doesn't match. I was able to get a lot of information from a viewer that knows about this exact steam engine at a local museum that was restored, and he sent over a bunch of close-up and in-depth photos that I could not have done without. They showed me all the missing parts that I needed to remake, how they looked, and what their function was. It was an insane amount of help for this entire restoration, so I'm super grateful to him. Now, as you can see, the shaft is completely murdered. The pulleys or flywheels on the shaft are completely gone. And if you haven't noticed yet, most of the easily accessible bronze or brass parts have been completely stripped, most likely for scrap metal, off this steam engine. So that's unfortunate. But that just means I gotta remake more and more bronze parts, which is always fun, I guess. Now, my biggest concern, because I couldn't actually check, because none of the parts would turn, is if the piston would actually move in the cylinder here. Because if it's stuck, it's a whole ordeal. It would still probably run once I got the piston free, but there'd be so much damage to the cylinder that it might be a whole new cylinder situation. Now, when I opened this up, I did not expect to see the exquisite mega orange rust that, you always see in all the thumbnails everywhere. This time it's actually real and not fake like so many others. I was told that this was in a river recently, so that's what I'm assuming all of this orange rust is from. Usually orange rust is pretty new, so I don't know when that exactly happened. Now I'm just lightly spraying this with penetrating oil and slightly tapping the piston up and down until it starts moving, and it moves, and I'm happy. So it doesn't look like it was massively stuck, but the piston rings are shattered. That might have been why this was put out of commission at some point. Who knows? So I will need to, for the first time ever, remake piston rings. So that's going to be an incredibly interesting process, and I'm kind of excited to see how that goes. The piston itself seems fine, so I might be able to reuse that, but we'll have to check the wear on everything to see. what the real damage is. Now this part right here connects to the eccentric on the main shaft, and it goes up and down. And as this part goes up and down, it moves the valve up and down, allowing the steam to enter the piston at the correct timing, allowing the steam to either push the piston down or push the piston up at the exact time that is required. That timing will need to be reset because it's obviously completely lost at this point, and I will have to figure that out later once everything is hopefully remade and put back together in a functioning manner. There also seems to be Babbitt within this little kind of square or rectangular groove here, which personally I haven't seen that style of Babbitt shaped casting ever before, and it makes me really wonder how in the world that was properly cast, because usually it's a nice cylinder and the Babbitt material just flows right under the shaft, so that's interesting. Now, I excuse the dusty, rusty orangeness out of this chest, is what it's actually called. So if someone mentions a steam engine chest, this is what I'm talking about. And that contains the valve that I was mentioning previously. Now, I'm not entirely sure how this comes apart at this point. Once again, I have never dealt with a vertical steam engine like this before, so I'm just going at it with my usual approach of trying to kill myself. You can see those split nuts at the top and bottom of the valve there, and those are literal split nuts. Someone has taken nuts and cut them in half. And I want to keep these because I find that hilarious. When you could have just used, two nuts, but don't worry about it. Just cut nuts in half. So I'm probably going to keep those because I find that hilarious. But the rest of it will obviously need to be either repaired or remade because it's just so unbelievably rusty. This also really doesn't want to come off, so I'm guessing those studs are bent for some reason. I don't know why. It seems odd, but whatever. Now, at the bottom of the chest, there's more brass parts and an actual packing material. And packing material is common around stems, like valve stems in this case, on steam engines. So the steam doesn't actually fly out when the stem needs to move up and down. It kind of creates that seal in a way that I guess other material at the time could not. So it exists in a few places on this tool, and it is probably asbestos based, just due to its age. So I'm taking precautions as much as I can, keeping it wet, keeping it oiled in this case, and wearing a mask, of course. Now, the split nuts were tricky. I honestly didn't think they would unscrew. I thought with the amount of rust that's in there, they're just locked in forever. But the magic of heat and oil just seems to almost always work. Now, that valve that sits in between the two, or I guess technically 4 split nuts, is going to need to be relapped, and same with the valve surface on the cylinder, because they need to mate very well so that we get a nice seal. So the air in this case, since I'm going to be running this off of compressed air instead of steam, since I don't have a massive container of high pressure boiling water, to actually make this run, I need to ensure even more than I would if it was just run on steam that this seal that's created here is exquisite. Now, this shield cover was probably initially for heat, but if you run on compressed air, the cylinder actually gets cold due to the expansion of the compressed air in the cylinder. So, kind of not needed, but aesthetically, that's what is original. So, I'm going to remake that. I think I'm going to remake it out of wood to make it look extra fancy, just because I feel like it. Now, I'm really hoping that this cylinder comes off easily and isn't somehow like massively stuck to the body. If that was the case, it was just like rusted on, I would be kind of screwed because I'd have to machine both of these surfaces, and I feel like the surface on the body would be incredibly difficult to machine since it's attached to the entire vertical steam engine. So that came off easily, very happy about that. This bronze part is completely toast, along with basically every other bronze part. So all of those are going to need to be remade. And this is the crosshead. Now on either side of the crosshead you see some flat spots, and right there, and those are where bronze shoes would go. They are cylindrical portions of bronze or brass that would go on there and sit in the middle of the vertical steam engine body casting that we just saw and keep the crosshead in place as it moves vertically up and down, controlling the pistons. So those are completely gone. And machining those is going to be very interesting because I have to turn a cylinder of bronze with currently unknown diameter with some other fancy parts. So I'm probably going to enlist the help of Keith Rucker at vintagemachinery.org to either get those recast and remachined or just machine them entirely. Now it looks like there's a little grease cup that is missing. Personally, I don't believe the grease cup is original. I would probably guess that it was an oiler at some point that got switched out for some reason. So I will be replacing that with a sensual brass drip oiler because they're just so beautiful. Now this part, I can already see a repair on the bottom arched part, so we're going to have to investigate that later and see what is up with that exactly. Is it bronze? Is it just weirdly welded? It kind of looks right now like it's just lead, which is not good, but I'll have to see after the evaporous soak. Now, someone has previously been in here, obviously, because this is modern liquid gasket that has, hardened, obviously, over time. I probably will use the exact same thing to make up for all of the inaccuracies due to the rust and degradation over time, just to ensure a maximum seal, because usually the mixture of steam / water and oil would seal up things much better than just the compressed air that I'm going to be shoving through here. So I really need to make sure that all the tolerances are like maximum sealing potential. So this will actually run, and if it does run, I'm going to be so happy and also somewhat surprised at myself. Now, after a soak overnight, things are looking much better than they did previously. I was actually very surprised at the condition of things afterwards because they just visually looked horrendous. But whatever. That's the magic that this barrel contains. Even the large casting stuff came out not too bad. There's a little bit of red primer. It looks like underneath a layer of black, which is probably paint, but it may have been Japanning. You don't usually use a primer with Japanning, so it's kind of throwing me off. But personally, I would Japan this if it actually fit in my oven, which it doesn't. But I just do that so we can get to sandblasting. Yay, sandblasting! It's so much effort. Now, on to the post-derusting analysis. So, there's still a few things I couldn't get off while it was rusty, and now those are easily removable, which is making me very happy, especially with this stud remover tool thing that I got. Very sensual tool. Now the babbitt on the bottom is definitely thinner than it should be there on the bottom of the babbitt bearing. So the whole thing is going to get replaced, not just the tops, everything. Now this is the eccentric. And it is stuck massively on the shaft. You can even see to the right of the eccentric, there's a groove that is just massive. You can see the wear in that shaft. It's just insane. So I need to get this off so that I can put it on a new shaft that I need to make that will not have massive wear spots. It only took forever and 1 trillion taps, but I finally got it, and you can see why the issues have arisen there. Lots of set screw damage. And I'm just going to cut it off so that I don't have to hammer through the entire shaft, just to make it shorter, since I need to slide that part off and put it in the lathe. And now drill out the crank disc because it's not coming off. I can't see where it comes off, and it looks like it's just peened in, so I have really no other option but to drill it out. So it's a slow process. My lathe is wanting to die, as usual. I should probably upgrade to a more powerful lathe, but let's make this lathe suffer. Because it's not like I have the ability to fix it. Now, I'm dumb. That wasn't peened. It was peened, but it was a peened over screw that I could have just unscrewed and slid this crank disc off. But no. Why do investigations, Eric? Just go straight to machining like a psycho. So now that the screw is gone, oh, look at that. It just so easily comes off. This also lets me kind of analyze what the actual dimension of the shaft was supposed to be, since this got nowhere whatsoever over time because it was stuck in place. So that kind of helps also, but I'm just a failure. Now I'm machining this out of a brand new piece of wonderful steel. Just fits in my lathe, and I'm just taking my time. This took hours to do on my lathe, and I have to go so slowly. But I did finally sort my life out. I could crank it high to get like a nicer finish, but not really because my lathe is pure garbage. So in the end, I just kind of polished it up with some files and sandpaper on the lathe to get it perfect. You can see here, my lathe is at maximum speed and it's crying. It's crying for me to put it out of its misery. Now, this was well before I replaced the bearings and things in my lathe. So everything's slightly better now. Not much, but the lathe doesn't want to die as much. This is back in February, believe it or not. So I'm going to melt out all the babbitt. I will save this, and I can reuse it in the same pouring if I really wanted to, but I'm going to use new fresh babbitt, a more modern recipe that would work just as well, just I know it's consistent, not all poopy. And the pours go pretty well. The bottom pours are always fairly easy, although this weird kind of groove thing in the shaft throws me off. And I preheated the castings as much as possible to allow the flow to be really nice and get into everywhere all at once instead of having, sections of hardened babbitt bearing all around it, which is not ideal, although really not a massive issue. This part here really threw me off. I spent a lot of time trying to get this perfectly level, perfectly set up, and I didn't know how to pour this because it's attached to a massive casting, and it's such an odd shape. So I was just hoping this would work well enough And it did. It filled the space. You can see where the lines are, where Babbitt didn't melt into each other and hardened before it could melt into each other. Not the end of the world. This part doesn't really receive any load. It's more of just a placeholder that needs to be lubricated. So I'm okay with it. If it becomes an issue, I can redo it if I need to. Must drill the oil hole now before I forget. Because otherwise I'm going to be doing this while the shaft is there, and that's not a good idea. You can see the pour is, I don't know, mediocre. There's still all those wavy lines where the pour didn't seal up all in once. I'm not concerned because that's just a grooves for oil, so let it just be what it wants to be at this point. I'm not running this for the rest of its life nonstop, so I'm not concerned. But if I was concerned, if that was the case, I would re-pour these, most likely, if I had to make my own judgment call. But it would be fine either way, I personally think. You got to cut the oil grooves, and those only are cut on the top cap of the Babbitt bearing. Now, since this may have been Japan, Japaning's nice and thick, or at least whatever was already on there was very thick, and the original casting is very rough, and those don't really mix. So I need to kind of fake the original thickness of the coating and fill in the rough casting as best as I can to make it all smooth again, because this was a very smooth end product. And it required an insane amount of body filler, so that took hours and hours of sanding and applying, but it's probably as good as it's going to get. I don't want it too crazy smooth. It doesn't look like a casting or look old anymore. It doesn't need to have, you know, a Ferrari body finish. It just needs to look like a vertical steam engine from the 1920s. So that's what I stick with, and I go with my usual Krylon farm implement black paint, and that seems to match Japaning fairly well. Now, if you remember the previous repair on here, I thought it was lead, and after it came out of the evaporust and wire wheeled, it was just bronze that was mega tarnished. So I reshaped that so it looks better than what was there, but it's still off a little bit. Both of the castings are slightly off, and I'm not sure if that's just due to the wear in this eccentric part here. So what I'm going to do for funsies, really, more for practice, is try to apply a very thin layer of bronze by brazing it onto the cast iron little by little, so I get tons of practice, and then machining that back down to a nice thin, smooth layer so that those two other arch parts can sit and clamp around this piece and run nice and smoothly with some oil, because this is just cast iron on cast iron bearing surface, and that obviously has worn down more than other parts over time, so it needs some sensual revitalization, and I'm going to try and do that. I don't think, you know, this is a necessary procedure. It's obviously completely fine for the last 100 years, but I'm not massively concerned. I just want to see if I can pull it off. And I got kind of close. Like, there are gaps. The gaps don't even matter in this case. They'll just fill with oil and be other oil pockets, which are amazing. As long as it's smooth, then it should be fine. But it didn't turn out too bad, I don't think. And it was fun. I love brazing. Now, here's the valve stem rod attachment transfer power piece. I don't even know how to call it. Anyways, it's massively worn out from the up and down and apparently back and forth motion for some reason. It should just be an up and down motion. So I need to completely drill it out. Nice and straight as much as I can. And I'm just going to shove bronze bushings in there. Even though no movement is going on in there, I can just replace these bronze bushings as needed in the future. And it's also just a simple solution. I could have shoved the solid bar of steel in there and remachined it. That would have been fine too. I just found this easier at the time. And I'm going to smooth out the shaft that's worn on that T-looking part that I just shoved parts in. It's not eccentric, or it's not concentric anymore, and I need to make it nice and smooth, because I'm going to be remaking the bronze parts that clamp around this, so I can really make this any size I want. And then cleaning up the bronze pieces to see all the damage. Obviously, I will need to get to this in the next video. All of these will need to be remade. I will literally need to remake all of these parts, including a new piston rod, eccentric rod, my entire life itself. So I just got a lot of work ahead of me, and in the next video you will see it all be done, hopefully. I thank you for watching, and I thank you for your support once again, and I will see you all very soon. Later.